So we set this up so that goes on here. Yeah, we put this together yesterday. And then this. There you go. Should be good. We're live now. I just saw it come up. So we're going to get started with this month's hot topic conversation, which is stories from the Congo DRC. Ooh, that got loud. So this last summer, I spent 10 days in the Congo DRC, and I wanted to share some of the things that I learned and experiences that I had while I was there. I went to the Congo to visit an orphanage that I've been working with over the last year or so. And every year, the foundation sends someone over to visit the foundation and see the property and meet everybody who works with the kids and the foundation there. So this summer, I was the one that they sent. And so that is what our hot topic is about today. Now, just a little bit of information on the location of the Congo. This is the Congo DRC, which stands for the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It is the largest country in sub-Saharan Africa. It is among the 5 poorest nations in the world. We'll talk a little bit more about why that is later in the presentation. It was a Belgian colony until 1960. And the languages that they speak there are French as the colonial language, and then some of the local tribal languages are Kikongo, Kituba, Lingala, Swahili, and Shituba. So one of the reasons why I went this summer is because I speak French fluently, and I have lived in Africa before. I spent a year as a Fulbright in Senegal in 2016 and 17. So with that background and experience, I was one of the best candidates to go there and have this experience. This is not to be confused with the other Congo. There are 2. Republic of Congo is a different country, and it's also called Congo Brazzaville. Brazzaville is the capital of the Republic of Congo, and Kinshasa is the capital of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The name Congo comes from the Bakongo Kingdom, a Bantu tribe that lived in that area. The 2 countries share traditions, languages, and dishes, a lot of cultural similarities. So that is why when you hear Congo, you won't necessarily know which one someone is talking about if they're talking about it. And so one of the big differences is size. And when you're looking at the colors of the flag, the DRC flag, it has blue on it, and the Republic of the Congo flag is yellow, green, and red. So a little bit more about the difference between the 2, because this is kind of an important aspect. The Belgian Congo was a colony from 1908 until 1960. It became the Republic of the Congo, Leopoldville, after its independence, and then it became the Democratic Republic of the Congo in 1964. The capital of the Belgian Congo was Leopoldville. Leopold was the king of the Congo, and then it was renamed Kinshasa. Belgium's colonial state was infamous for maiming those who failed to meet harvest quotas and other gross human rights violations. The French Congo was part of the French Equatorial Africa, which was created in 1910 by joining the French Congo with neighboring French colonies. So what is now known as Togo, or even Senegal was a French colony as well. So all of those in that region. It was also called Gabon Congo, or the Middle Congo. The capital was and is still called Brazzaville. And the French also treated the local people ruthlessly and subjected the territory to exploitation by concessionary companies and basically stealing their resources. The capitals of the two countries were founded across the Congo River from each other by competing colonialists in the 1880s. And I'll show you a little bit more about the Congo River later in the presentation. So that gives you a little bit of a background of why there are two Congos. It is solely because of colonial competition between French and Belgium. So how did I get there? This is always a question that I get. How long does it take to get there? What was the flight path? Things like that. So I took a flight from Philadelphia to Doha. Doha is the capital of Qatar, or Qatar, in the Middle East. And so that was almost a 12-hour flight. We did get quite delayed on the tarmac, so actually it was more like 13. But flying time was 11 hours, 40 minutes. And then I had a 10-and-a-half-hour layover in Doha. The Doha airport is one of the nicest in the world. This picture on the right here is of the orchard garden that they have inside of the airport. Like a full actual orchard. You can get lost in it. It's really, really cool. And they have sounds of like birds and stuff being put into the orchard. It's really cool, and it gives you a little bit of an escape from the setting of an airport. And then after staying the night in the Doha airport, where they do have quiet rooms for sleeping, they actually have hotels inside the airport, and you can rent like a little pod to sleep in while you're there. So it is a very nice airport to have to spend the night in, much nicer than some of the other ones that I've spent the night in my years of traveling. And then I flew in the morning, or overnight again, from Doha to Kinshasa, the capital of the Congo DRC. That's a 7.5-hour flight. And in order to get there, I did need to get a visa. So the US does not have an agreement with the Congo to just go with my passport. And so I had to go down to the embassy in Washington, D.C., and apply for my visa. Ahead of time, I had to get an invitation letter from those who were welcoming me in the Congo. And then I also have to prove that I have the required vaccinations. So I had quite the series of vaccinations that I needed to get into the country. I already had some of them because of having lived in West Africa before. So that was helpful for me because the yellow fever vaccine is required to get into most African countries. It's not easy to find in the US. So because I had one when I went to Senegal, I didn't have to get another one, but I just had to update my typhoid vaccine and some other more obscure vaccinations to get into the country. And they did make me prove with my vaccine yellow card that I had everything that I needed as I entered the airport. So I got my visa pretty quickly and easily. I think the privilege of an American passport is one of those things that people don't really understand until they get to use it and realize that it's not very hard for Americans to get into a lot of places. So when I got there, I had a welcoming party of people who are connected to the foundation and the orphanage that I was going to visit. So the people in this first picture, they are the ones who met me inside of the baggage claim area. That is in the middle. His name is Karen. He's the president of the foundation board of directors in the Congo. There is a foundation board of directors in the US as well, so it's dually managed. And then Pastor Enoch, he is the one that is on the right, and he is the pastor that works with the orphanage. And then the people in the picture with me, they were waiting outside of the airport to welcome me. Now at that point I had been traveling for about 36 hours and I really hadn't slept. I'm not a very good sleeper on airplanes, unfortunately. And I thought I was going to be able to sleep in the Doha, overnight in the Doha airport, but it wasn't very conducive for sleeping. So I was pretty exhausted when I got there. But that group of people were so welcoming. And so the woman who's standing next to me in the long white dress is, everybody calls her Mama Christine. She's kind of the mother figure for everybody who works on the board. She's not one of the mothers for the children in the orphanage. She just mentors them. And so I'll show you the team on the next slide. The woman in the purple is Pastor Enoch's wife. Her name is La Promesse, which is French for promise. It is very common for Africans with French colonial influence to have names like Promise and Emmanuel and Precious and things like that. And her name is Promise. And everybody calls her Mama La Promesse, Mother Promise. And she and Enoch are both pastors. And the kids in the picture are their children. And then the woman in the white blouse is Kaden's sister-in-law. So this is the team, or part of the team, of the Marie Mambu Makaya Foundation in the Congo. Kaden and Miguelor are brothers of the gentleman in the US that started this foundation. And then Hélène is in the middle there. She is the main house mother. She lives in the house with the children. And then Mama Christine is there, and then Enoch and Promesse are there as well. These are the main players in the board of directors for the foundation in the Congo. So this is a picture of Kinshasa. It is the capital of the Congo DRC. It is a massive mega city. It's the most populous city in Africa. So the second is Lagos in Nigeria, and the third is Cairo in Egypt. So you can kind of think about that reference. 17 plus million people live there, and it's one of the world's fastest growing, what they call mega cities. It's just enormous. So I stayed at a hotel called Hotel Léon. It was a very nice hotel. You can kind of see it from the outside. My favorite thing about the hotel was the food was fantastic. It was so good, and they had really good buffet for breakfast, and the dinner buffet wasn't as good as the breakfast buffet. I don't know why or how, because they served the same things, just as a lot of people, breakfast is cultural, right? So I use this as an example with my students all the time because I'm the assistant director of the GO program at Susquehanna, and we teach the prep and reflection courses about what culture is and the things that are involved in culture. And one of the big things is that food is very cultural and what you eat in your meals. So a lot of you might know a really famous Vietnamese soup. What is it called? Pho, right? Or pho. And I love pho. I think it's one of the greatest things ever. And I would eat it for lunch or dinner any day. But in Vietnam, pho is a breakfast food. Okay, so when we think about stuff like that, we're like, okay, I get all of my pastries and everything in the top left there because that's what I see as breakfast. But all the other stuff that's in there, all of the meat and the vegetables are also available for breakfast because culturally that might be what you would normally eat for breakfast. So I had my nice hotel that was kind of in the, I would say a downtown type area, but Kinshasa is so big that there's no such thing as like a downtown type area. It was a few minute walk to the US Embassy. Well, that was one of the things that I was looking for is location-wise. I wanted to make sure safety-wise, if anything happened, I was able to get to the US Embassy fairly quickly. So speaking of safety, one of the things that we did to make sure that I stayed safe was we contracted with the local police department, and I had a security detail the entire time that I was there. And the reason for that is Kinshasa is not a place that tourists would normally go. It is one of the poorest countries in the world, and it doesn't have the infrastructure for tourism or much at all. And my whiteness was very, very prominent. I was the only white person I saw the entire time I was there. So as an extreme minority, I draw a lot of attention. And so we wanted to make sure that I stayed safe. And because of the history and the poverty there, when you think that on average they live on $2 a day. So when they see a white person, they see wealth, and that I have all the money that they would need or want. And so I bring a lot of attention. So there are some situations where I would be leaving a place and getting into the van, and then people would come around the van. And so the police who was with us the whole time, he was able to clear those people out, make sure nobody came up to me personally or invaded my personal space or anything like that. And so we rented this van, and we had the police officer with us the entire time. So I have this little video of just driving around Kinshasa, just so you can kind of see what the city looks like. I mean, there are some parts of the city that are very modern and look really nice, but it wasn't very far from some of the most abject poverty that anyone will have ever seen. And so some other pictures of the city. The church, the Catholic Church, is a prominent part of the culture of the Congo. It's a very Catholic country, very Christian country, so mostly Catholic or evangelical. And so Pastor Enoch and Mama La Promesse, they are evangelical pastors. And I wasn't super involved with the Catholic side of the culture because I was so embedded in the more evangelical side of it while I was there. And then the picture on the left, that's the base aérienne. That's the old airport, and now it's the kind of the Air Force base for the country. Not that they actually have much of an Air Force, but they built a bigger airport that I flew into, the capital airport, and it's newer. But this was the very, very old one from the 70s and 80s. And so it's kind of a little bit more in town than the airport. You had to drive a little bit farther out. The Ferris wheel had just been built, and I was super bummed it wasn't working yet because I wanted to go and see the Kinshasa from the top of the Ferris wheel. That would have been really cool, but it has not been inaugurated yet. And then not very far from there, this is what a normal street in Kinshasa would look like. So not paved, lots of shacks and stuff that people lived in. That's actually the street, for lack of a better word, that the orphanage is located on. Now, the kids live in a compound that is fully walled, and it's quite large, and you'll see a little bit of a video of it later. The kids don't generally leave, they don't go and play on the street because it's not necessarily safe for them. And so there's a lot of space in the compound for them to play. And then when they go out, they get in, someone drives a van into the compound, picks them up, and drives them out. But they don't come out onto this street just because that's not the setting that the kids are used to being in, and it's not necessarily safe for them. Kidnapping is a very lucrative business in the Congo, and the kids are well known in the area for being in an orphanage that is supported by American dollars. And so that in and of itself makes it dangerous for the kids to be out and about on their own. So the kids also have a security force. We don't employ a police officer, but we do have security that are there at all times. And so there are 3 security officers who work for the foundation at the orphanage. They have uniforms, and they are always there. They actually help, take care of the kids and everything, but they are a constant presence. And if anybody comes up to the gate, they are there to make sure that they are supposed to be there. Another video in the daytime of a nicer part of Kinshasa. So that you can see that's the Israeli prime minister or the ambassador's home. So obviously this is a paved road and a nicer area. And the way you can tell that it's a nicer area is because it is paved, but there also isn't trash everywhere. They do not have a municipal trash system in the Congo, and so there is nowhere for the trash to go. It's just in the streets or wherever else. So that is one of the biggest aspects, is if there's a canal through, it will be lined with trash and full of trash. And when I was living in West Africa in Senegal, they had a similar issue, and they were a couple of years into developing a municipal trash system. And they were trying to change the culture around trash and where it goes. And that is such a huge aspect of increasing the health and wellness of the community members. And so there are parts of Africa that are working towards creating a municipal trash system, but the trash that's everywhere is such a huge part of the issues that are in the city, especially in the city. In the countryside, you have a lot more space and can have a specific location for it, but in a big mega city like that, they haven't established a trash system yet, and I think that's something that they'll be working on. So I spent a lot of time, obviously, at the foundation with the kids. On this particular day, I was wearing an African outfit, and I didn't know that the kids were also going to be in more formal African wear. They don't normally dress like that. They are usually dressed like they look like American kids in their dress. But they happened to be wearing that day, and I had no idea what the kids were going to be wearing, but I happened to put on an African outfit that matched theirs a little bit. The blue with their blue, it was very cute. So, of course, then we had to take group pictures, and it was a whole thing. But these are the kids. There are two sets of twins. And so you have Alvin and Abel are the ones that are to the right of me. And then Elisabeth and Patrick are to the left. And then there's a 2-year-old. Her name is Kobe. So we spent a lot of time just getting to know each other. I brought a lot of art supplies that were provided by a lot of people here in the US. I had an Amazon wish list before I went, and people bought things off the wish list that included painting supplies and markers and crayons and all that stuff. And I brought all that to them so that we could learn about each other and play some games in English, and they learned how to say "my name is" and share their name in English. And so we spent a lot of time kind of getting to know each other. So those are the kids holding up their names. So you have Alvin and Abel, they are twins. And then Patrick and Elisabeth are twins. And Kobe runs everything. She's 2 years old, so obviously, as the toddler. And she gets that silly grin on her face when she knows she's doing something that everybody will think is adorable, but also a little naughty, because that's just how she is. And she's adorable. And so I had a lot of fun getting to know the kids, and we all did our names together and took pictures. And so this is, you can tell that they're in their regular clothes, not in the African outfits. So that was the kind of crux of the time that I spent there, was trying to get to know the kids as much as possible, and the people who worked with them, and see the property and everything. So one day we went on an excursion with the kids. It's not something that they do super often because they have to get a van, and they're young, and we're driving across the city. It could take hours, and so then they're stuck in the van. But we decided to go to the river. So the Congo River, again, splits the capital of Congo, Kinshasa, and the capital, Congo Brazzaville. And it is massive. So going to the river means that you're basically going to the beach. And I was there towards the end of the dry season. So the dry season and the wet season, those are the only 2 seasons that they have. So we're used to 4 seasons here, and fall, spring, and winter, and summer, and one kind of leads into the other, and it's not too shocking of a difference. They kind of slowly get over. We love the beginning of fall, right? Whereas when I lived in West Africa, they were a little bit higher up towards the desert, the Sahara Desert, and so they had a 9-month dry season and a 3-month wet season. Now, Congo is more wet than dry, and because it's closer to the equator, and they have actual jungle areas, tropical, and so it's more the other way around. It's more 9-month wet, 3-month dry. But I remember when I was living in Senegal, I got there at the end of the wet season in October, and there's 9 months of no rain. And I'm so used to being, from the United States, where no matter what season it is, the clouds could roll in and it could rain. And I was living in Dakar, which is the capital city of Senegal, on the westernmost point of the African continent. And it was a peninsula, so there's ocean all around. And like today, it's a bit misty. And every once in a while, the fog or mist would roll in from the ocean. And I would say to my friend, oh, maybe it's going to rain. It looks like it's a little cloudy. And finally, after a few weeks, she looked at me and she goes, okay, I'm not sure you're understanding this. It is the dry season. Not a single drop of water will fall from the sky for the next 8 months. Stop thinking it's going to rain. And it didn't. For 9 months, there was no water falling from the sky. And I now understand why entire religions are built around rainfall and the changing of the seasons. Because after 9 months of the dry season, the first time it rained felt miraculous. And it was really funny because I had been in Senegal at that point for 9 months. And I remember posting on social media, like, you guys, it is raining. There is water falling from the sky. You have no idea how amazing this is. Like, this is the coolest thing ever. And everyone back in the US is like, has she lost her mind? Like, what is happening here? And I'm like, no, but like the life-giving power of that rain is not something that we understand because we have it. We're never going to go months and months and months and months and months without rain. And the water is there, and we know that it's going to come. Even if we're in a drought, it's not going to last 9 months, right? But they always have that transition, and after 8 months of no rain, you've got 1 more month to go, and it's just, everything is dry, and everything is dusty, and everything is just like, ugh, we need some water. And then the water comes, and it's just amazing. And so, yes. They can grow food. They have ways of doing it. Now, there is water that comes down the rivers from other places or up the rivers from other places and stuff like that, but they also do have to import a lot of food as well. Yeah. The drinking water usually is ground, like from like underground, the reservoirs underground that fill during the wet season. The wet season is like a lot of rain all at once. And so there's a lot of ways to collect it, and the ground reservoirs get refilled and everything like that. So we were towards the end of the dry season when I was there, and so the river was quite low. It's a massive river, but it was low, and so we got to go out a little bit farther than you normally would, and we were, playing around. But the big part of this is that the river is not like a safe type of thing to go into for the kids. You're on the edge of it, but you can't go into the water. It's the world's deepest river, the second longest in Africa after the Nile, and it goes through the rainforest and it crosses the equator twice. And so it has a mass amount of water. It has the largest water flow of a river in the whole world. So it's the border between the two Congos. Now, when it was the Congo Kingdom, it was the whole region on both sides of the river was the same kingdom, the same culture, and then the colonial powers came in. But it is a massive river, even when it's the lowest. So this is one little part of the river, and we're standing on the side. We're throwing rocks into the river and having lots of fun, but it's not something that you would go into. There aren't very many bridges either, because it's so deep that it's hard to build a bridge. And they don't necessarily have the infrastructure that we have here. And so there are a few bridges over it, but not very many. Not like the Susquehanna, right? And even this one is massive compared to the Susquehanna, which is the largest non-navigable river in North America. And the Susquehanna is, especially around here, it's quite wide, but the Congo is like at least 2 or 3 times that. So having lots of fun, throwing rocks in the river, hanging out with the kids. It was just nice to go out and play and have fun, and we stopped and had a drink, and teaching them how to throw rocks in the river and not at each other was a big part of it, because they're 5 and 6 years old, and the 2-year-old, of course. So the next day after our excursion to the river, we had things planned with the kids, but everything was put on hold because Pastor Enoch's grandmother passed away. She was 107 years old, which is twice the life expectancy of a Congolese. And so because I was there, I was part of the funeral services. And again, being the only white person that a lot of people had ever seen gave me a level of privilege that was not earned at all whatsoever, but it also raised the esteem of the family that had me around them. And so for her funeral, I was actually sat up with the family. And the reason for that was twofold. Obviously, it raised the prestige of that family, having the white person there. But also, my security escort had to be there too. And they didn't want me out in the crowd. And so I went to Mputu's. That was her last name, and that's what everybody called her, because over the years, everybody just ended up calling her Mama Mputu. Her name was Dinandandan Julienne Mputu. Everybody called her Mama Mputu. And she lived through the history of the Congo that is incredible. So I kind of did a little bit of a timeline. You probably won't be able to read it, but that's okay. I'm going to use her life. And one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because this is what I was thinking about during her funeral. She was born in 1917, and so I was thinking, okay, what did she see in her lifetime in this place? And I wish I had been able to have a conversation with her, because the stories that she would have had would have been incredible and also heartbreaking. So she was born as a colonial subject of King Leopold in what was considered or called the Belgian Congo. She was 43 years old when they got their independence from Belgium. And then they went into what is called the Congo Crisis, which were the wars and the factions to gain power after the Belgians left. She was 48 years old when the dictator Mobutu took power. And he changed the name of the DRC to Zaire. So when you hear reference of the country Zaire, that's the Congo DRC. And we still hear references to Zaire, right? And so that is what he called the Congo. And so when she was 54 years old, the place that she lived in had changed names multiple times already. And then he stayed in power until she was 86 years old. So at this point, she is definitely an old woman. She has had 7 children. They have gone through wars. She started out as part of the Belgian colony. So in 1908, Belgium took over that region as a colony. But before that, the king himself, Leopold, had owned personally that region, or said that he did. It was called the Congo Free State, which was ironic in its name. And it was owned by King Leopold personally. That's why the capital used to be called Leopoldville. It was directly involved in both of the world wars. So when Mputu was born, it was during World War I, when Congolese men were fighting and dying in European conflicts. Because what happened in World War I and in World War II was that the colonial powers that owned those regions of Africa, if they were fighting against each other in Europe, they made the Africans fight against each other on their behalf. So that was a consistent thing that happened in colonial rule. But it didn't end at colonial rule, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So her sons go through World War II, right? She's born during World War I, and it's not very much later that her sons are living through World War II. And she's obviously living through World War II as well. And then there's also the Congo Wars that happen. So Mputu gets put into Kinshasa. She has to move, things like that. She's 43 years old when they gain independence. So now they don't have to fight the wars of the Europeans. But there's problems in the fact that the colonial powers came in and created borders that weren't real. Right? So the French colonies and the Belgian colonies cut a kingdom in half. So you had the Congo kingdom, and they were one culture and united and everything like that. And the colonial powers came in and fought and separated people and split them up and created factions that didn't exist before. But also, there were entirely different kingdoms in the eastern part of what is now considered the Congo. So this was a very common thing all across colonial influence in the world. They did the same thing in South America, the different tribes. They did the same thing here in this area with, creating states and territories that had nothing to do with the native communities and their regions that they lived in. It was very similar in Africa. So the problem was that when they got independence, she was 43 years old, it's 1960, and someone steps up to fight for the independence, and his name was Lumumba. And he says, okay, we're independent now, I'm in charge. And the kingdom in the Far East said, well, why are you in charge when you were, maybe from the Congo kingdom, but we're from, the Goma kingdom, and why don't we just be our kingdoms? But the colonial powers are saying, no, these are your borders and you have to keep them. And so now there's fighting between the Congolese to figure out who's going to be in power. Our kingdom was bigger than your kingdom beforehand. Why can't we be in power? This is going back and forth. If the colonial powers had not come in, then those kingdoms would have just been their kingdoms. But the colonial powers come in, stick them together, and say, you're the same people, figure it out. And then there are factions that come in, and the UN refuses to go in and help because you wanted your independence, figure it out. So then the Soviet Union goes in and provides military supplies and advisors to Lumumba. The problem is that now we've got civil wars going on. And it becomes what they call a proxy conflict. Because what's happening in the 1960s? The Cold War between Russia and the US. Now Russia goes in, the Soviet Union goes in and helps Lumumba because he needs help. And the US says, well, we don't want Russia to be powerful there, so we're going to support the other side. And yet again, even though it's not colonial, they are fighting wars on behalf of other countries. So the US backs the people in the East, and the Soviet Union backs the people in the West. And instead of the Americans fighting the Russians in the Cold War, we're using the Africans to fight each other on our behalf again. 100,000 Congolese are killed in that war. And then the US is the one that wins the proxy war, and they put Mobutu in power. He's a dictator. Mobutu is 48 years old when he took power. He changed the name of the country to Zaire, and he stayed in power until she was 86 years old. That is a picture of Mobutu with Nixon at the White House. Now, he was known for severe human rights violations against the Congolese, gross corruption, theft, and mismanagement of all of the wealth that's in the Congo. And this is a US-backed dictator because the US wins the proxy war. Yay for us. So now it's 1997, and he is ousted from power, and there's a free-ish but not fair but not free election. And another Congo war breaks out, and it's 5 years of fighting, and 5.5 million people are killed. And we're trying to figure out who's going to be in power, right? And instead of allowing the country to maybe be one kingdom and another kingdom like it was 100 or 200 years before, international pressure says, these are your borders, we gave you your borders, stick with your borders, figure it out. And that's not really working very well. So why is this one of the poorest countries in the world? It should be one of the richest countries in the world. And this was one of the most frustrating things for me as I was driving around, seeing the extreme poverty and the trash everywhere and the lack of education and that 20% of children in the Congo are orphans because of the ongoing civil war and conflicts. They are considered one of the world's richest countries in terms of natural resources. They have iron ore and gem quality diamonds in south central Congo. The central regions are rich in industrial diamonds. The northeast has gold, coal, and iron ore deposits, and gold, manzanite, and diamonds in the northwestern regions. So why don't they have the wealth in their day-to-day lives? Number one, colonial greed. Right, because that's the reason why the Belgians and the French fought over controlling the Congo. They had the resources, and if you were a colonial power, you got to keep it all, and you didn't have to give it back to anybody who actually dug it all up. This is where the term blood diamonds comes from. That is why I'm very anti-diamond, right? Because these kids spend their lives digging diamonds for the De Beers Diamond Corporation, right? They don't get the money. Their families don't get the money. The Congo itself might get the money, but that's number two, local corruption and the mismanagement of resources. So Mobutu was a dictator and stole as much money and resources as he possibly could, but also sold it. So all of these big countries come in and say, well, you have all this iron ore and we want it for this manufacturing thing. So we're going to graciously offer you $100 a year for the rights for this iron ore. And he says, well, that sounds great. That should be bringing in millions of dollars to their country, and it's not, because they're being taken advantage of, right? And the conflict and infighting over control. And so we were seeing, and I'm driving around and seeing all of this and being like, this is so frustrating, because even now we're in 2024 and we think, well, can't the UN and the United States and these other countries like France and Belgium should be stepping in and helping them figure out how to do this? But here's the thing, why should they trust Belgium or France or the United States after hundreds of years of exploitation and proxy wars and all of that? So we're in our, sitting over here in our privilege, being like, well, why don't they just accept our help? Well, I mean, why would they? Because when you understand the history, who do we think we are, right? We already killed 5.5 million of them in one proxy war. How many more are we going to keep going, right? The U.S. put Mobutu in power and then let him do whatever he wanted with the Congolese people. And now Mobutu was pretty good to the people in his tribal community because the culture is very tribal. But then all of the other millions and millions of people in the Congo that weren't his tribe, he didn't care. The gross human rights violations, right? That's the problem when we're there. So during her funeral, I'm thinking about all of this history, and after the funeral, I did some research and figured out what this timeline looked like and what she lived through. And it was just incredible to understand 107 years and everything that she lived through. She had 7 children. 3 of them preceded her in death during some of those proxy wars. And then 4 of them were there at her funeral. And they're in their 80s, right? She's 107. And funerals in African tradition are very different from funerals in American tradition, and they are much more jubilant and joyous, especially when you think about 107 years old. So I have some videos from her funeral, and I'm hoping the sound is good because they're pretty loud. So the first one is the procession of her casket into the funeral. Can you turn it up a little bit, Jevin? So anyone in white is her grandchild or great-grandchild. So her grandchildren and great-grandchildren were dressed in white. I asked her grandson, the pastor, he was not dressed in white because he was in his pastoral suit and everything. I asked him how many grandchildren and great-grandchildren she had, and he said he couldn't even count. He actually did not know, which I understand because my great-grandmother passed away when she was 97, and I would have to think about it. And she didn't have nearly as many kids as, this woman has 7, and then each of them had, however, and her legacy was just massive. And then this is the procession of her casket out. So there is a saying that says, when an elder dies, it's like a library burns to the ground. And I was thinking about all of the things that she lived through in the Congo, and just thinking, yeah, that's pretty accurate. That's pretty accurate. And so before we processed out, these are the bearers who they salute the casket, and then they take it out. And then we went. This is the only time I left the city, because it wasn't super safe to leave the city. There was some conflict happening in the regions around the city, so I didn't go out except to the burial site. So it was a couple hours of traffic out to the burial site, and we were pretty close to the hearse that was carrying her casket, but it still took us 2 hours to get out there. But this is the countryside. It was really nice to get out of the city and see something besides just like constant city, and I was able to see the countryside a little bit. And so this is what the burial site looks like. So everybody walked all the way across the cemetery to where she was going to be laid to rest. And this is one of the monuments at the cemetery. The other thing, the last day that I was there, quick question, yes?
Was their caskets buried in the ground over there?
Yes, but the white stones on top are the covers. Okay. Yep. So for the very last day that I was there, it was Sunday, and so the pastor, Enoch and La Promesse, moved their church service, and they had it at the foundation's property on the compound so that I could attend, the kids could attend, and everybody was there. One of the things when it came to the privilege that I had while I was there, one of the things that we talk about a lot in the reflection class and the prep class of the GO program is how social identity and the aspects of your identity that are most prominent will change depending on where you are. So obviously my whiteness isn't as prominent here in Selinsgrove as it is obviously in the Congo. And the other thing that was very prominent that gave me a status above what I would normally have is the fact that I am a Christian. And to them, that's a really, really big deal. And so during the service, they had me stand up and speak to the congregation, and I had a conversation with Pastor Enoch a couple of nights before when I was at his house for dinner, and we talked about me being involved in a church and how they're pastors and everything, and how different the systems are. Unfortunately, he is not an exception to the fact that it is a lucrative job. Pastors ask for a lot of money from their congregation, and it's for their personal use. And so during this service, they did 3 offering calls. And so they might be offering calls for different things, but they do a lot of offering calls during the service. And this is a more evangelical style of service. And so this is me standing up there. He's introducing me. He's telling them that I'm a Christian like them and that I'm coming to worship with them, and I'm not just here for, to stand up here, but because I'm actually a Christian myself. And that was a really big deal for them. And so I was able to speak. The nice thing is, like I said, I speak French fluently, so it was easy for me to stand up and speak to everybody. And then I wanted to show you a little bit of a different type of, this is a more evangelical style, but a very African style of preaching. And there are two people up there because the local language is Lingala, and then the colonial language is French. And so if the pastor is saying something in French, the translator will translate it to Lingala. And if the pastor says it in Lingala, the translator will translate it into French. And this is where translation is hard, right? So I'm going to show you the video of the one little part of the service. I said that to Pastor Dietmar. I said, your next sermon can have a little bit more energy, you know. I think everybody would kind of freak out. And then the music is also very different. They have a band, basically, that plays and sings. And the gentleman that is standing there, they call them the prophets. Becoming a pastor is very different in the Congo or in African traditions. It's basically declaring yourself a pastor or a prophet. And then the bigger your personality gets, the higher of a prophet you are, and kind of that's how they build their following and things like that. And they do make quite a bit of money. It's one of the more prestigious and lucrative jobs that you can have. And so that prophet was called in to be there while I was there. Again, the privilege of my whiteness, I guess. And so I just took a little video of the music. And that is also on the foundation property. So that is, usually that space is empty and the kids are playing in it and things like that, but there's enough space there for a service. And then one of the reasons why they also had the service there is because of something that had happened a couple of days before then. And as I mentioned, my whiteness and my presence brings a lot of attention to the foundation, to the orphanage. And one of the results of that is that there was a 2-day-old baby that was left at the door of the orphanage a couple of days before this service. And so there was a lot of talk about whether we would have the funds to actually keep another child, because you cannot adopt children out in the Congo. It's against the law. And like I said, about 20% of children in the Congo are orphans because of the civil war and the health and everything like that. So there were a lot of conversations of, do we have the funds to support this child when we already have 5 that we will be supporting until they're usually in college or have graduated from college. And when we're here and fundraising and we think about all the money that gets sent to the Congo, we think we don't have the money for this. We don't have the funds for it. But then when I'm there and I see the poverty and everything like that, and I'm there saying we don't have the money for this, and then I come back here and I see the wealth and the resources that we have, and I say, who am I kidding? We have all the money. We have all the money compared to what they have there. But also we live here, and we need our resources for the place that we live. If we had our resources and lived there, we wouldn't have any problems in the world. But we don't. We have the resources that we have here for where we live, and we try to send as much as we can back there. So we were looking for donations and everything for this little girl. That's me holding her. I think she's 4 days old in that picture. And that's Mama Hélène, she taking care of the baby. And then we named her Mira, which is the word for miracle. So her name is Mira Grace, the grace of a miracle. And we were able to get enough funding from donors in the U.S. to keep her. And so now there are 6 children at the orphanage, 2 5-year-olds, 2 6-year-olds, a 2-year-old, and a now 8-week-old. And that is a picture of her from last week. And so she's definitely growing and getting bigger. So that was kind of the end of my time in the Congo, was kind of getting to see this baby, and then I came back to the US the same route that I took to get there, so Kinshasa, Doha, Philadelphia, and then came back here and got to work finding funding for this little one and continuing the support of the foundation. So if anybody is interested in learning more about the foundation, the website is makayafoundation.org. They also have a Facebook page, so you could easily find it, Marie Mambu Makaya. And if you have any questions about it, you can let me know. But if you have any questions now, we're actually going to, sorry, go ahead. Oh, okay. I was going to say, we have a couple of minutes. I think the choir is singing. Yeah, so we need to go out into the parlor and continue our conversations. But I will take one question before we go. Yes, so the biggest issue that they were having was with trafficking of children. And so they were using adoption as a way to kind of look beyond that and using the children for nefarious purposes. And so now it's just flat illegal, no matter who you are or where you're from. Okay, so we're going to go out and grab some coffee. Thank you. And we're going to be able to go out into the parlor. If you have more questions, we have coffee and everything out there, but we're going to let the choir practice.